The Invisible Rust, the tragedy of the Morandi Bridge. Prologue, the city between the mountains and the deep blue sea. Genoa is a city of verticality, a place where the earth seems constantly at war with the sea. Pressed hard against the Mediterranean by the jagged peaks of the Apennine Mountains, it is a metropolis with no room to breathe. For centuries, this geography defined its strength as a fortress and a maritime republic. But by the mid-20th century, as Italy awoke to the roar of the post-war economic miracle, Genoa's geography became its prison. The city needed arteries. It needed steel, commerce, and cars to flow from the industrial west, where the massive Ilvia steelworks belched fire and smoke into the sky, to the bustling port in the east, and onward to the French border. But standing in the way was the Polcevera Valley, a wide, chaotic trench of railway yards, factories, densely packed tenement buildings, and a river that fluctuated between a dry, rocky bed and a raging torrent. To bridge this chasm, Italy needed a monument. They needed something that spoke of progress, defiance, and the sheer willpower of modern engineering. They called upon Riccardo Morandi. Chapter 1: The Poet of Concrete. In the 1960s, Riccardo Morandi was not just an engineer, he was an architectural maestro. While his international contemporaries were falling in love with the sleek, lightweight elegance of steel suspension bridges, Morandi was a disciple of concrete. He viewed steel as flimsy, prone to vibration, and ultimately temporary. Concrete, however, was ancient. It was the material of the pantheon. When reinforced and pre-stressed, Morandi believed concrete could be made eternal. Morandi's vision for the Polcevera Viaduct was staggeringly ambitious. The bridge would stretch for over a kilometer, soaring 45 meters above the valley floor. To support this massive ribbon of roadway, he designed 3 colossal pylons, Pier 9, Pier 10, and Pier 11. They were shaped like giant letter A's, standing 90 meters tall. But the true signature of the Morandi system, the feature that made the bridge famous and would ultimately seal its doom, was its stay cables. In a standard cable-stayed bridge, the deck is held up by dozens of thin steel cables spreading out like a fan. Morandi rejected this. He opted for a minimalist, muscular aesthetic. Each massive section of the bridge was supported by just 4 primary stays, 2 pairs on either side of the pylon. Because there were so few cables, they had to be incredibly thick and under immense tension. And then, Morandi made his most fateful decision. He ordered that these critical high-tensile steel cables be completely encased in pre-stressed concrete. Chapter 2: The Armor That Became a Blindfold. Morandi's logic was, on the surface, entirely sound. The environment in Genoa is uniquely hostile to infrastructure. The air is thick with moisture and loaded with chloride ions, salt whipped up from the Ligurian Sea. Furthermore, the valley was filled with sulfur dioxide from the nearby steel mills and factories. Acid rain and salt spray are the mortal enemies of steel. Morandi believed that by wrapping the steel cables in a sheath of concrete and then compressing that concrete, he would create an impenetrable barrier. The concrete was meant to be a shield, locking the steel away from the corrosive, salty air. He proudly declared that the viaduct would require minimal maintenance. It was a bridge built for eternity. When the Polcevera Viaduct was inaugurated in 1967 in the presence of the Italian president, it was hailed as a masterpiece. It looked like a brutalist cathedral, a triumph of geometry and mass. For the people of Genoa, the Ponte Morandi quickly became an everyday fixture, a concrete giant that carried their daily commutes, their holiday road trips, and the heavy pulse of European trade. But deep inside the concrete stays, in the absolute darkness, a microscopic war had already begun. Chapter 3: The Slow Rust of Time. The flaw in Morandi's impenetrable shield was a misunderstanding of how concrete behaves over decades. Concrete is not solid, it is porous, like a sponge. And the bridge was constantly subjected to forces Morandi had not fully anticipated. In 1967, cars were small and trucks were relatively light. By the 1980s and 1990s, the traffic volume had quadrupled. Massive lorries carrying shipping containers rumbled across the deck day and night. This constant heavy pounding caused the bridge to vibrate and flex. These vibrations created microscopic hairline cracks in the concrete sheaths covering the stay cables. That was all the ocean needed. Rainwater, laden with industrial sulfur and sea salt, seeped into these microscopic fissures. Through a slow chemical process called carbonation, The concrete lost its alkalinity, which is the chemical property that normally stops steel from rusting. Once the salt reached the high-tensile steel strands hidden deep inside the concrete, the cancer took hold. The steel began to oxidize. It rusted. When steel rusts, it expands to several times its original volume. This expansion created immense internal pressure within the rigid concrete sheath. The expanding rust pushed outward, causing the concrete to crack further, widening the pathways for more water and salt to enter. It was a vicious, compounding cycle of decay. The greatest tragedy of the Morandi Bridge was that this decay was entirely invisible. Because the steel was entombed in concrete, safety inspectors walking the bridge could only see the gray, solid exterior. Morandi's shield had become a blindfold. The very armor meant to protect the bridge was hiding its terminal illness from the world. Chapter 4. The Ignored Whispers. By the late 1970s, less than 15 years after the bridge opened, Riccardo Morandi himself realized something was wrong. He returned to Genoa and noted that the degradation of the concrete was happening at an alarming, accelerated rate. He wrote a report warning of a loss of surface chemical resistance and urged that the bridge needed constant protection. In the early 1990s, the situation became impossible to ignore. Inspectors found severe corrosion in the stays of Pier 11. The decay was so bad that external steel cables had to be added to support it. Yet, tragically, Pier 9, the westernmost tower, was left in its original configuration. As the years rolled into the 21st century, the maintenance of the bridge fell to Autostrade per l'Italia, ASPI, a private company. Bureaucracy, cost-cutting, and institutional complacency took over. Acoustic sensors installed to listen for the snapping of individual steel wires inside the concrete were reportedly unmonitored or broken. Reports of degradation were allegedly softened. The bridge was aging, groaning under the weight of 25 million vehicles a year, and its internal tendons were rotting away. Inside the stays of Pier 9, the steel wires were snapping one by one in the dark. In some cross-sections, up to 70% of the steel had simply turned to orange dust. The bridge was a giant holding up a mountain, unaware that its bones were turning to chalk. Chapter V. The Storm and the Breaking Point. The morning of Tuesday, August 14, 2018 was apocalyptic. A fierce summer tempest had stalled over the Ligurian coast. The sky over Genoa bruised to a deep, bruised purple, and the rain fell in blinding, torrential sheets. Thunder echoed off the surrounding mountains, and lightning flashed across the valley. Despite the terrifying weather, traffic on the Morandi Bridge was intense. It was the eve of Ferragosto, the sacred Italian summer holiday. Families were packed into their cars with luggage and beach gear, heading west toward the Riviera. Delivery drivers were making their final runs before the holiday shutdown. Commuters were just trying to get to work. At 11:30 a.m., the wind was howling through the cables, shaking the cars. The bridge was enduring a massive combination of dynamic loads, the weight of gridlocked traffic, the immense force of the storm winds, and the physical degradation of 50 years. High up in the southern stay of Pier 9, the critical threshold was reached. The remaining unrusted steel wires, holding back thousands of tons of concrete and gravity, were stretched beyond their physical limit. At 11:36 a.m., they let go. The failure was catastrophic and instantaneous. Witnesses caught in the traffic jam later described a sound that defied description, a metallic shriek followed by a roar like a jet engine and then a deafening boom. When the southern stay cable snapped, the delicate, tense equilibrium of Pier 9 was shattered. Without the cable to hold it up, the 90-meter-long section of the roadway dropped. The sheer, colossal weight of the falling deck pulled the giant A-frame pylon inward. In a matter of seconds, the majestic concrete tower twisted, crumbled, and plunged into the abyss. Chapter Vis. The Silence. After 210 meters of the bridge simply vanished into the rain, more than 30 vehicles, including a massive supermarket delivery truck and cars filled with families, were thrown into the void. They fell 45 meters, the height of a 15-story building. They plummeted into the chaotic valley below, crashing onto the industrial warehouses, the railway tracks, and the rocky banks of the Poltavera River. For a few agonizing seconds, the sound of tearing concrete and crushing metal echoed through the valley. And then, there was a haunting, terrible silence, broken only by the sound of the relentless rain and the blaring horns of the cars left stranded on the ragged edges of the surviving bridge. In the hours and days that followed, Genoa became a war zone. Hundreds of firefighters, rescue dogs, and volunteers clawed through mountains of pulverized concrete and twisted rebar. The rain turned the dust into a thick, suffocating paste. The city held its breath as bodies were pulled from the wreckage. In the end, the toll was devastating. 43 people lost their lives, and hundreds more were left homeless as the surrounding tenement buildings were condemned. Genoa was cut in half. The psychological shock to Italy was profound. The Morandi Bridge, once the ultimate symbol of the Italian economic miracle, had become the ultimate symbol of its decay. Chapter 7: The Autopsy and the Reckoning. The investigation into the collapse was one of the largest engineering forensic examinations in European history. When investigators finally cut into the ruined chunks of the concrete stays from Pier 9, what they found shocked them. The internal cables weren't just rusted, they were annihilated. The investigators found voids inside the concrete sheathing where grout had never been properly injected during construction in the 1960s, creating pockets where salt water had pooled for decades. They found that the carbonation of the concrete was total. The rust had eaten through the high-tensile steel-like acid. The legal fallout was explosive. Over 50 people, including top executives of the Highway Management Company and officials from the Ministry of Transport, were brought to trial. The prosecutors argued that the collapse was not an act of God or a tragic accident, but the result of willful negligence, forged safety reports, and a systemic prioritization of profit over public safety. They argued that the managers knew the bridge was blind, knew the cables were rotting, and chose not to close it or repair it because it would cost too much money. The Morandi Bridge was a victim of engineering hubris at its birth and a victim of corporate greed at its death. A year after the tragedy, the remaining pillars of the Morandi Bridge were wired with explosives. In a matter of seconds, the last standing remnants of Riccardo Morandi's concrete dream were brought to the ground in a cloud of dust, erasing it from the Genoa skyline forever. But a city cannot survive with a severed artery. Genoa needed to heal. They turned to one of their own, Renzo Piano, the world-renowned architect born in Genoa. Piano designed a new bridge, free of charge, as a gift to his grieving city. The new viaduct, named the Genova-San Giorgio Bridge, is the exact opposite of Morandi's design. Where Morandi used heavy, opaque concrete, Piano used light, gleaming steel. Where Morandi built massive A-frames, Piano built slender, elegant pillars that look like the hull of a ship floating across the valley. Most importantly, the San Giorgio Bridge hides nothing. It is a bridge designed for paranoia. It is equipped with an internal dehumidification system to prevent rust. It has an army of sensors continuously feeding data to a control room. It even has robots that travel along rails beneath the deck, constantly scanning the steel for the slightest imperfection. It is a bridge built with the humility that the Morandi Bridge lacked, an acknowledgement that nature is relentless and infrastructure must be actively protected. Today, the new bridge stands as a testament to Genoa's resilience, but as drivers cross it, smoothly gliding over the Polcevera Valley, they pass 43 tall light poles illuminating the deck. They burn brightly against the night sky. 43 silent sentinels, standing as a permanent reminder of the price of invisible rust and a memorial to the souls who fell when the concrete finally broke.